Now let's talk about some options that we have for displaying our geometry as we're working in ZBrush. So let's use, again, this rifle as our example, and this can be found just by going to Lightbox, and you're going to go into the project, and there's the rifle there. You can use any of these other models, but we just want to have something to look at here. So right now we can see kind of the shaded view. We have the material selected, and you can see that material applied along with the color. But sometimes we want to be able to see, for instance, the wireframe on this model. So how do we do that? Well, you can see there's this kind of vertical row of icons, and this is going to contain a lot of the things that we can do here with our view. Some of these things are going to be hidden because of the screen space that we have here in the recording area, but we can also go to transform to access those. So polyframe is going to be right here at Shift F to activate it. If you turn that on, you can see that part of our model, you can see the wireframe on it. Now it's only part of the model because of the fact that we're working with multiple subtools. We'll talk more about subtools later, but in the tool palette, if we open up the subtool subpalette, you can see that this rifle is made up of a bunch of different parts. Okay, so you can select the different parts and you can see the polyframe view update. So it's based on whatever subtool we happen to have selected. We can also select different subtools by alt-clicking on them. So if we click on this main one, we can see here that we see a nice wireframe on that. Now we also see that parts of the model are different colors. These are polygroups, which we'll talk about later. It's just basically a selection mask for your polygons. If you'd like to only see the wireframe but not the fill or the polygroups, you can click these little buttons at the top. So you can see where it says line and fill. If I turn off fill, I'm only getting the wireframe. Or I can turn that back on, or I can only see the polygroups and not the wireframe. So with this polyframe button on, you can toggle between this line and fill options in order to see your geometry. We can also work with transparency. So we could make our models transparent. So you can see here, I've got a selected subtool and everything else is transparent. This is great for being able to work with objects and place them in relationship to other objects and be able to see them even though they might be hidden. You can turn on that transparency, and again, that's going to be down here on this line or in the transform palette. You can see that transparency here. You can also change the way that transparency works by turning on ghosting. Okay, and that's an additional option there. Now we can also go ahead and turn that transparency off there. We can also change the view. So we talked about the orthographic versus perspective a little bit. Here's that perspective button and you can change that. We can also turn on a floor grid. So if we turn that on, you can see we get a little bit of a grid at the bottom just to kind of orient ourselves and make us feel like we're working in 3D space here. And you can see that the Y value is the one that's currently selected, and so that's why we get just this single plane. But you can also turn on the X plane, which would give you kind of a side plane, or the Z plane. Oops, turn that on. And so you can have multiple planes in there to be able to reference and work with. And you can turn that off and on. Shift P is the hotkey combination for that. You can also, if you get your model off to the side and you want to center it up in your view, you can also hit frame, and F is the keyboard shortcut for that. So if we just frame up on that, it's going to take that subtool that we have selected and frame it in our view, in our canvas. So polyframes are going to become, groups rather, are going to become very important later on down the road, and they just let us kind of, whatever we do in ZBrush, we can confine it to a particular area on our model by using polygroups. It's a way to kind of separate things. And then subtools are a great way to kind of break up models into smaller pieces. And we'll talk again more about that stuff later on. We really want to take our time and go through all these different topics because ZBrush can have, it is kind of a steep curve to get into that because it's a little bit different than other applications. So we want to make sure to spend some time on those ideas. So the next thing we'll talk about is moving objects around our scene. So we've got all of these subtools, or we have multiple tools that we draw. How do we actually move things around the canvas, so in relationship to one another? So we'll talk about that next.